This panel was recorded Friday, March 19th, 2021, during the 15th Annual Public Administration Research Conference hosted by the Center for Public and Nonprofit Management at UCF. The panel is titled Education and Public Purpose Today, Communicating Knowledge, Engaging Partners, Empowering Educators. It is moderated by Mr. Melvin Rogers of UCF.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Melvin Rogers. I'm a faculty member in the School of Public Administration in University of Central Florida. And welcome to all of you for our panel discussion, session 3. In session 3, we'll cover education and public purpose today, communicating knowledge, engaging partners, and empowering educators. Information. And I'm going to introduce our panel today, and I hope I don't leave anyone out. We have Mehta, who is a four-year student at the University of Central Florida, graduating semester with a major in biomedical science and a minor in psychology. Mrs. Mehta was a founding officer of Exemplar, a service organization supporting students with intellectual disabilities at UCF. In August, Mehta will be planning to go to medical school, beginning medical school, and plan to continue our mission of making education more accessible to all students, regardless of their different abilities. Welcome. Next, I have Dr. Sanguiliano and Lonski. Is a recent graduate of the UCF Public Affairs program, the Public Affairs doctoral program, a former middle school teacher. She currently works as a research fellow with the Peace and Justice Institute at Valencia College. Her research entries include education, teaching, professional development, and equity and inclusive pedagogy. And lastly, we have Rebecca. Miss Rebecca, MPA, is a PhD student in the Public Affairs doctoral program at the University of Central Florida. Rebecca has government and legislative policy experience with experience working with the Florida state legislators for research focus in public management, health policies, and government intervention impacting social equity. Great presenters, great topics today. I would like to start with Dr. Sanguiliano and Lonski. Doctor?
Hey, so I'm Dr. Jennifer Sanguiliano Lonski, and I'm here today with my colleagues, Lori Lott, the PJI manager, academy manager, and Hank Van Putten, the PJI lead facilitator. And we're going to talk about teaching in troubled times, the link between social justice education, inclusive education, and teacher agency. We'll start with a background about the curriculum, classrooms, and theories before going into what PJI is and what it stands for. This actual study results and what this means for practice. Often there is a disconnect between what is taught in public school curriculum and what is considered relevant and culturally appropriate for students, as well as accurate historically. In a study of 9 states, Jarrad found that 3 states listed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as the only influence within the civil rights standards. Only 2 of the 9 states mentioned Harriet Tubman in any of their standards, and 1 state completely neglected to mention Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in their entire history curriculum.
Thank you.
You're mute.
In a review done by Davis in 2018 of the 1,186 social science standards for K through 12 education here in the state of Florida, only 68 included references to Hispanic or Latinx students, despite the Hispanic individuals making up 26% of the Florida population. In Texas, high school contemporary U.S. history standards, only 6 of the standards directly referenced Latinx Americans, and none of the standards identified Asian Americans or Native Americans as important historical figures. And why is this important? Over 3,000 public school teachers studied, 78% of math teachers and 68% of English language arts teachers reported receiving curriculum directly from their district that complied with the state mandates. This is from the Center of Policy and Education in 2016.
This was mirrored with 107 teachers in Mississippi who were asked to pick from a list of what was the greatest influence in their classroom practices. 96% of them said it was interest in helping my students attain better test scores that allow them to graduate, while only 80% said that it's because it was the best instructional practice. This is a problem. Curriculum represents the values, beliefs, and understandings that exist within societies. Gregory mentioned that curriculum is what teaches us what to believe. When states have standardized state standards, which are then translated into legitimized, taught, and tested content, this forms a singular narrative that reinforces dominant male, middle-class, white European culture. In other words, what is mandated is what is tested, and what is tested is considered important. This deprives students of the opportunity to have a curriculum that provides an accurate and inclusive narrative of history. Identifying the problem of social reproduction in schools is relatively easy. However, disrupting it is a lot more difficult. This requires a two-pronged approach. First, curriculum needs to be culturally relevant, socially just, accurate, and appropriate for students. Second, there needs to be a sense of agency within the teachers. Teachers need to feel empowered and capable to teach such a curriculum. In this sense, agency refers to what Giddens calls the belief that the interference requires something to happen, and Bandura noting that if you don't believe you can change something, you won't be able to. Another reason that agency is important is because when you look in the classroom system, taking systems theory from social work, there's a concept of Hollins. Each individual and each portion comes with its own system inside. Students have their own sense of capital. Teachers have their own family history, beliefs, etc. The classroom itself has a grade level that you can't change for research, content area standards, and the school administration. The only two parts you're able to change are daily lessons and the teacher's sense of agency.
At the Peace and Justice Institute at Valencia College, we promote peace and justice for all. Our aim is to nurture an inclusive, caring, respectful environment on campus and within our community, one where conflict leads to growth and transformation. At PJI, we provide a safe space for people to take leaps of faith and acts of courage in making human connections with others while engaging in critical, sometimes difficult conversations about the extraordinary times in which we live. We invite you to watch this short video that'll tell you a little bit more about PJI.
The Peace and Justice Institute at Valencia College is an award-winning program listed as one of 101 things to love about Central Florida by the Orlando Sentinel. In 2018, PJI was presented as a credible pathway to the culture of peace at the United Nations.
Here at PJI, we promote peace and justice for all. Our aim is to nurture an inclusive, caring, and respectful environment on our campus and within our community, one where conflict leads to growth and transformation. We are guided by our principles for how we treat each other as practices of respect and community building.
We hope that you will join PJI's community of peace practitioners. We believe that every citizen is a potential peace builder. We offer programs for students, staff, faculty, and community members.
Students, you can get involved by receiving a Peace and Justice distinction, becoming an ambassador, joining the Peace Through Service program, becoming a leadership fellow, or taking peace courses at Valencia. For more information, visit our website, valenciacollege.edu/PJI. You can also reach out to your respective campus coordinator, whose information can also be found on our website.
Our calendar of events features workshops, film screenings, guest speakers, and scholars, and an annual conference amongst other important events available for the community. The Peace and Justice Institute is also available to facilitate workshops in the community on a wide range of topics related to peace and justice.
These workshops can be customized to meet the needs of groups, organizations, agencies, and departments. Get more details about booking a PJI workshop for your organization or business on our website.
PJI.
The Peace and Justice.
The foundation of the work that we do at PJI are the principles for how we treat each other. They form a foundation that allows us to turn off our automatic responses and move from an either or situation into one that offers a both and solution.
So let me tell you a little bit about the Peace and Justice Institute Teachers Academy. This is just one of the unique programs that we offer that is part of Dr. Sanguiliano Lonski's research. So the PJI Teachers Academy is a week-long intensive program designed for educators by educators. The immersive cohort-based program supports teachers in reflecting their lives and current practices with an eye to deepening equity in their hearts, minds, and classrooms. Based on the latest neuroscience and teaching literature, participants will explore topics such as privilege, race, gender, trauma, resilience, empathy, mindfulness, and missing histories, while also building relationships and community with others. Our academy model is based upon a decade of collaboration with leading scholars like Dr. Peggy McIntosh, Dr. Beverly Tatum, George Lopez, Dr. Michael Nagler, Elaine Sullivan, Emily Stile, Dr. Elma Abdul Hadi Jadala, and Dr. Kenneth Ginsberg.
So this looked at the study with PJI Teachers Academy as the backdrop. 2019, there were 75 public and private school and university personnel who attended over the course of 3 weeks. Of the 75, 27 represented one single district. 17 of those were employed as classroom teachers. This study focused on the classroom teachers in order to ensure that there were equal district requirements, limit variability among school environment, and ensure equal instructional capacity. So I had 13 teachers who ended up participating. They contributed over 8 hours of interview data and responded to pre and post tests. 6 schools, elementary, K-8, middle, and high school, 2 of which were Title I schools, and multiple schools had multiple participants. The question was, what is the relationship between their self-reported learned knowledge and skill set and how they discussed implementation of social justice and inclusive curriculum and their sense of teacher agency? This was part of a larger dissertation that I just defended with UCF in August. So this part of the dissertation, we used 3 different data sources. First, there was the quantitative follow-up tests. How did they do on the follow-up test? And I averaged the tests to find out what the mean score was among all participants. They also had the qualitative interview responses, which were axial and thematically coded, and an inventory sheet. The inventory sheet I used once I had the transcriptions to go through and see how many times did they mention something directly related to PJI or related to the research requiring a social inequity and how to disrupt it. From there, I took the average of the test scores and the average number of artifacts, and I ranked the teachers based on if they had above or below the average. This divided the teachers into 4 groups: high, 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 low, low, high, low, low. All the teachers except for 1 fit into the same for knowledge and implementation. Today, I'm just going to talk about the knowledge portion. Once I had the teachers into groups, I then coded for evidence of teacher agency using Pantic's 4-part model, looking at purpose, what's their purpose as a teacher, how do they reflect on their practice, what do they feel is their competency related to social justice, inclusive education, and what's their sense of autonomy in the classroom. Here's what I found. The teachers who scored high and high, they were higher than average on artifacts and higher than average on the follow-up tests, had an intrinsic motivation for teaching. They taught because it's where they felt they belonged. Their reflection was intrinsic. They felt that teaching was part of the reflection process. Competency was high. They were able to change their curriculum to meet the needs of their students. Their autonomy was high. They felt they had control in their own classroom over the materials and content. The teachers who scored high on the artifacts, below on the follow-up, were also high agency teachers. Their purpose, though, was student-centered. They're there for the students. Their reflection was based on the students. How are the students changing as individuals? Their competency was high. They felt that they were able to share their social justice knowledge and inclusive education knowledge in the classroom, and their autonomy was high. They were able to change their classroom. Those who scored low on the artifact list, but higher than average on the follow-up test, were completely different. They felt that their focus was curriculum. They were teachers to teach the curriculum. Their reflection, how did their students do on the test? Their competency was low. If it wasn't in the standards, it wasn't happening. Same thing with the autonomy. One teacher mentioned, I have to do what the state says I have to do. Finally, we had the teachers who were low and low. They were also curriculum focused. Their reflection was based on the group. How are other teachers doing? Their competency was low. They didn't feel they could implement any new change. Their autonomy was low. The administrators want numbers, they want data, they want test scores. They don't want kumbaya. So what does this all mean? We know that high agency and teachers, the teachers who had this, were high agency regardless of their follow-up scores. It was based on what their classroom practices were. They also described this as an intrinsic trait, which means this could potentially be fostered in individuals under the right circumstances. It was not dependent on the teacher environment, content area, grade level, ethnicity, teacher ethnicity, or gender. The way I determined that was I looked at the teachers, what their content areas were, which I had a large range, their grade levels taught, and I marked where the teachers were. Where it's red is where they represent the minority ethnicity of the school, and where it's bold, the majority ethnicity. There were high and low teachers of both within the same school. So it didn't necessarily matter who your principal was or what ethnicity your students were or what ethnicity the teacher was. There were high and low agency of both. It depended on how they felt about themselves. For practice, this means that all teachers, they all recognized inequity. The low agency teachers felt that they had to align to the standards. High agency teachers felt comfortable and responsible for enacting change. Low agency teachers felt bound to the curriculum to the point where it was the reason they were a teacher. High agency said, well, standards are a minimum, they're a guide. Low agency teachers said, I teach content. High agency, I teach students.
So the implications beyond K to 12 is the agency related to social justice and inclusive practices can be taught, regardless of the age, ethnicity, race, ability, gender, socioeconomic status. While we are more connected through the internet, we need to set aside some time to talk about these difficult subjects and try to reach common ground under a common set of norms, which we consider our PJI principles. In order for lasting change to occur, networks need to be built and frequent opportunities to connect, discuss, and review social justice and inclusive strategies need to be scheduled. So some of the things that the Peace and Justice Institute is doing is we are hosting 3 sessions of the Academy this summer. We have other workshops and events that we can custom design for all organizations. And you can get this on the information that I posted about on the in the chat from the PJI website and from the Academy. And we offer customized programs like the PJI Youth Academy, the Administrators Academy, Guardians Academy. We also have offered teen summits and professional development, all customizable. So currently in a data collection, we are currently in a data collection phase for a follow-up study with private schools and 2 more school districts that Jenny will be doing.
Thank you so much. And I think we came in just at time.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Lonski, and also for the great work your colleagues and you all do at the Peace and Justice Institute at Valencia. And thanks for bringing partners to UCF.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we have Mehta. Mehta, please.
Hi, can you hear me now? Sorry, I think I had my mic muted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Let me share my screen. Okay, so today I want to talk to you guys about COVID-19 lessons and challenges. And specifically, I want to talk about a service-based organizational model that supports students with intellectual disabilities in a virtual post-secondary environment. And so a little bit of background on myself. I am a fourth-year student at the University of Central Florida. And I am also a founding officer of this organizational model that I will be speaking of. So just a brief overview of what I want to discuss today. I want to start off by giving a little bit of a background on students with intellectual disabilities and what exactly are intellectual disabilities. And then I want to go into talking about inclusive post-secondary education programs and what they are, how they help students, and what that could mean for students with intellectual disabilities. And next, I want to dive into talking about inclusive education services, which is actually a program at University of Central Florida. Then I want to speak about NICE Exemplar, which is the service organization that I was speaking of before. And then briefly talk about the challenges that we experienced due to COVID-19. And then the lessons that we learned along the way. So with a brief background on students with intellectual disabilities. An intellectual disability is defined as any significant limitation in intellectual functioning or adaptive behavior and everyday social and practical skills. And so usually these types of intellectual disabilities are diagnosed fairly early on in children. And most of the time, these children have an IQ that is less than 70. And so that does have significant impacts on their daily life, whether that is in school or just, everyday functioning. And there is definitely a spectrum where some people have a milder impact and other people have more severe intellectual disabilities. But typically, the commonality between all of these students with intellectual disabilities, who make up about 2 to 3% of the US population currently, is that they usually have limited educational opportunities. When they start school, usually they have special programs that they're enrolled into where they'll have classes in school with other students who are on a more, might have an IE. They might have alternative classes that they might take to reach those educational goals. However, a lot of times students struggle with completing their high school education. Oftentimes they'll get aged out of the system where they just continue to remain in high school until the age of 23. And then after that, they just are able to graduate and they receive a certificate. I think it is, in replacement of a diploma. And so after high school education, there are very limited options for these students with intellectual disabilities. And that also plays a significant role in their employability in the future. And so that leads me to talking about inclusive post-secondary education. And so, we previously talked about the struggles that a lot of students with intellectual disabilities have in gaining educational opportunities outside of high school. And previously, several years ago, post-secondary education for students with intellectual disability was not even an option, except that more recently, in the past couple of years, the Higher Education Opportunity Act was passed by the federal government, which allowed for increased funding for programs that support students with intellectual disabilities at a post-secondary educational level. And so since that act was passed, over 265 inclusive post-secondary education programs have popped up across college campuses all across the country. And one of these programs is through the Florida Consortium on Inclusive Higher Education. And so UCF, FIU, FSCJ, and USF all have different inclusive post-secondary education programs at their campuses. And so the point of these programs is to create inclusive integration, meaning that students with intellectual disabilities are able to take classes with students without intellectual disabilities. And this facilitates engagement with people or between people who come from different backgrounds, who have different, different support systems, different educational backgrounds, and so on. And so for our students with intellectual disabilities, these types of programs have been proven to increase their social, academic, and professional growth, and also to foster self-sufficiency and also increase their competitiveness in the workforce. Research has actually proven that inclusive post-secondary education programs are shown to increase employment rates for these students once they graduate, and they also increase their civic engagement. And last but not least, inclusive post-secondary education programs also allow for a huge diversity among students, among experiences, because again, both students with and without intellectual disabilities are interacting and working together. And so that exchange of different ideas really does help to build people's diversity of life experience. So inclusive education services is actually a specific inclusive post-secondary education program here at the University of Central Florida. And so a key part of inclusive education services is that the students with intellectual disabilities that are enrolled in this program actually are able to live on campus, and they audit university classes in the hopes to achieve a professional services credential. And so they go through this program for about 2.5 years. And through this program, they're auditing classes, and they also complete a capstone internship. And throughout this entire program, they are connecting with students both with and without intellectual disabilities, whether that's in their classes, their program, and even as they interact and resource facilitators, they are always connecting with people who are both similar and different to them. And through this program, the main purpose of this program is to help the students to develop professional skills with the main goal of helping them to gain meaningful employment upon graduation. And so that's why Inclusive Education Services, or IES, takes these internships that they have at the end of the program very, very seriously, because these internships often lead to employment opportunities once the students graduate. So a little bit of background on IES from a personal standpoint. I actually came across this program towards my second year of being at UCF. And I noticed that they do amazing work helping the students with intellectual disabilities really adjust to being on campus and become more self-sufficient and adjust to the rigor of college courses, and even, supporting them academically in the classes and making sure they know their way around campus and so on. But I did notice that even though the curriculum and the program itself is very integrated with students with and without intellectual disabilities, I still felt like there was a gap, or there was more that could be done so that these students with intellectual disabilities were able to be fully immersed into the UCF campus. And I felt that what could help these students would be some way to bridge the gap between the many resources across the university and just them being able to access those. So for instance, I noticed that even though students were really excited about sporting events, they often had difficulty actually attending the games or finding the location. Or even though they were really interested in specific special interests or their hobbies, they would not know that there are different organizations out there that they can join to foster those hobbies. And I actually helped to found this organization with a few of my colleagues. And the purpose of this organization was to really bridge that gap between students with intellectual disabilities who are enrolled in inclusive education services here at UCF and the many different resources at the university. And so the purpose and the mission is to really create that accessibility for our students. And the way that we do that is by hosting events in 4 main categories. And they range from campus involvement, health and wellness, and career exploration. And all of these different areas ultimately have the goal of leading students to be the best version of themselves, where they are academically successful, they are fully immersed in the campus, they are also promoting their own health, and they gain the professional skills that they need to gain meaningful employment once they graduate. And ultimately, the way that we do all of these things is by creating a campus-wide mentorship program. And so the premise of this entire service organization was that we would recruit students to serve as peer mentors, and we would train them and the nuances of working with students with intellectual disabilities and the way to interact with them, to fully engage them. And the students would also be trained to properly serve as a mentor for our students with intellectual disabilities. And once they pass through this training, they have the opportunity to work one-on-one with our students with intellectual disabilities to really support them and serve as a guide and a mentor, so that even though the students already have faculty at IES who support them, these peer mentors serve as an additional support to our students, and they serve as a more personal support in the sense that they can more directly bridge those gaps between what the students want to do in the university and the different resources that they have to actually access that. So some examples of things that we've done in the past. So here at the bottom, there's a picture that we had of a field day social, and this was just to engage students and make them more aware of the resources that we have on campus. Like, for example, we have Lake Claire, which has a huge recreational area, and kayaking. You know, students weren't aware that we had these different facilities across campus. So this was a fun way to get them to realize that and to show them how to use a lot of the equipment. Another thing we do is we have very regular academic support sessions, usually 4 to 5 times a week. And students can come in and ask questions that they have about their classes and any difficulties that they have with taking exams. And with health and wellness, we really make sure to promote students' mental health as well as their physical health, whether that's in the case of doing exercise classes, cooking classes and demos, and so on. And career exploration is actually very, very emphasized in our program because, again, the overall goal is always to just help our students become more professional and ready to gain employment once they graduate, because ultimately, students with intellectual disabilities struggle with gaining employment, especially if they don't enroll in such post-secondary education programs. And that's why we take it so seriously, and we really want to make sure that our students are equipped with these skills that they need to gain employment. So what we will do is host career workshops for our students and also accompany them as they attend career services workshops through our career service program and the Career Service Center. And we also host resume critiques, and we help students prepare their CVs and resumes. We also host mock interviews and provide individual support for students if they're applying for jobs and internships. So our program, Knights Exemplar, was actually created 6 months before COVID-19 happened. And so it was a really, really new organization. And we had made so many strides in that short period of time since it started. However, COVID-19 definitely put a wrench in all of that. It was a little bit of a difficulty in getting things up and running again in a virtual setting. And so all of our in-person events were, of course, canceled with the university being closed. And the main challenge that we had was transitioning everything to Zoom and have everything in a virtual platform. And another main challenge we had was just addressing the isolation, uncertainty, and loneliness that a lot of our students with intellectual disabilities experience during this drastic change in their lives. So for a lot of our students, you know, from hearing their different accounts as they've talked about how they felt during this period of time, we noticed as an officer board that when they first started in the Inclusive Education Services program here at UCF, they felt independent. They felt like they were they felt like a real college student on a real college campus taking classes. And so that sense of independence was something that they valued tremendously. And with COVID-19 happening and campus shutting down, they were unfortunately forced to go back home. And a lot of students were living with their parents again. They weren't seeing their friends anymore. They weren't taking classes in the same manner that they were before. Everything was online, and they felt that it was very personal. And so a lot of our students definitely have difficulty in adjusting to changes. And this was a very large change for them. And this was something that they really struggled with initially. And so a lot of our students reported feeling these negative feelings. They felt depressed and sad and lonely and isolated. And that was something that we took very seriously. And that was something that we wanted to address immediately. And so that leads me to talking about the virtual transition. And so our two main goals with the transition that we had to a remote platform was to first support our students in that transition and make that change a little bit easier for them, because we understood that the students already took quite a bit of time to navigate the systems that we use in just regular college classes, like whether we use web courses or email. And so that was already a challenge for them to learn in the beginning when they enrolled in the program. So we knew that the transition to Zoom was also going to be a struggle and it was going to take some time. And so we wanted to support the students as much as we could in that. And second of all, we wanted to really combat the negative feelings that the students were experiencing due to such a large change happening almost overnight. And so we really wanted to improve their engagement and make sure that they felt that they could still interact with everyone the same way that they used to in person, just over a more virtual connection. And so first, to address the technical support aspect of our transition, what we did was we actually attended all of the virtual IES classes, so Inclusive Education Services classes, and we helped all of the faculty and staff at IES with that virtual transition to help support the students and make sure that they knew what they were doing and how they knew how to log on to Zoom, they knew how to download the app in the first place, they knew how to get on to their classes every day. They found the links that were being used to connect them to the Zoom classes and so on. And another way that we helped them technically was also through the use of Slack. And so Slack is a platform that we use for communication in our organization. And we made sure that the students were all connected on there. And we used that as a medium for students to be able to ask help if they had any technical difficulties. So that meant that even before club events and meetings, we would consult the Slack and make sure that students didn't have any trouble getting onto the Zoom links. And if they did, we would have people who would address those concerns within like the minute and make sure that students were able to get on okay and troubleshoot with them. And so we've also had several different instances where we've just had to call up the students on the phone and walk them through how to troubleshoot their technical difficulties. But we made sure to do that because, again, it was really important to us that everyone was able to access the virtual technology and the virtual platform equally, just to make sure that everyone had that same opportunity to be engaged and to fully immerse themselves in all of our programming, even through a virtual setting. So outside of that, what we would do to promote engagement is that we started off with creating these weekly Zoom socials. And they actually proved to be a tremendous success because this, again, as a reminder, this was going on like 1 to 2 weeks after everything shut down with COVID. And so this was in the peak of quarantine where students were feeling isolated and just confused and lonely. And so these socials really helped our students with getting to see their friends again after several weeks and interacting and really venting out their feelings and talking about how lonely they felt or how confused they felt with everything in the news. And they didn't know what COVID was. And so a lot of them were talking about that. And so it was just a really great way for students to reconnect and to share feelings and address those emotions. And the reason that these were also successful was because we really made sure that we took students' feedback into account. And so we knew that students loved socials. And so we made sure to keep those up. And we tried to vary the different themes that we had. And we tried to make sure that students continued to be engaged. And so at first, we were definitely confused or concerned that the attendance at these virtual events would be a lot less than the attendance was during in-person events. And that was one of our main concerns, actually. But these socials really proved to us that that was definitely not the case and that students were really craving that social engagement and that the socials provided exactly that. And so those became a staple for us in our programming for the rest of the semester. And that really helped to bring students together and make sure that they stayed engaged even during Zoom fatigue that they experienced in their classes and even during the peak stressful times of the semester. The next thing we did for promoting virtual engagement was to create additional virtual events. And so a lot of our in-person events were canceled, and we tried our best to make sure that we were able to transition them virtually in a seamless fashion. And so that meant that we were able to hold professional development seminars and resume critiques online. We held academic support sessions online, cooking demos, exercise classes. And we really went out of our way to make sure that all of the students' needs were catered to in that way. And students also had the ability to give us different suggestions of things that they wanted to see. And we made sure that we were able to host those types of events as often as possible. And so this also really helped students because it created that seamlessness of a transition, and it made them feel that things weren't as different as they actually were, just because the programming continued to remain the same. We tried not to have as much of a gap in the programming, and we made sure that almost immediately after everything transitioned virtually, we brought out new events, and we made sure there wasn't really that gap of time where they noticed that there was an absence of events. And so another thing that we did for promoting engagement was that we actually changed our mentorship model. So Knights Exemplar was originally founded on the basis of one-on-one mentorship. And that entailed that each peer mentor would be paired up with a single student from IES who, and the peer mentor would support them in an individualized manner so that they would be able to help with specific needs that the student had. They would help them attend different events that they wanted to attend, but it was very much tailored to one particular student. And the way that we changed this was to create a more group mentorship platform. So what we did was we eliminated the pairing of our peer mentors to students, and instead we focused on developing a relationship between all the peer mentors and all of the students. And the socials really helped to facilitate this relationship between all of our students and peer mentors. And the reason that we found it important to change this mentorship model was because we found that we were having peer mentors who we could actually recruit to our program during the virtual setting and during the pandemic, where everything was already very difficult to alter, to keep in a virtual setting. And so because we were able to recruit fewer peer mentors, we wanted to make sure that each peer mentor was able to provide the most of their mentorship to all of the students and make sure that each student received equal amount of support from all of the mentors. And so in this manner, we actually found that the individual relationships were built organically, and it really flowed well, and students made friends with so many more people in this way. And so it really helped to increase the student social circle and help to promote even more engagement among both the students and the peer mentors. And lastly, towards the middle of the semester, we did notice that there was a decline in event attendance and engagement, and we mostly attributed this to Zoom fatigue throughout the semester, and also just classes becoming a lot more stressful and difficult, and so that requires more students' time. And so the way that we addressed this was to create a liaison position among our students with intellectual disabilities. And so this liaison serves to engage their peers and make sure that they actually attended events and promoted event attendance. And they also served as a way to provide technical support. And so the liaison really helped students with actually getting onto the Zoom links and making sure that they didn't forget when there was an event. And they also kept track and provided awards to students who actually did attend events with great frequency. And so all of these different initiatives that we took really helped to create a seamless transition to the virtual platform during this period of uncertainty and change with COVID-19. And so overall, through all of these different things that we implemented, the lessons that we learned were, for one thing, we learned that being in a virtual setting can actually be beneficial. When we first started trying to address all of these concerns and try to even imagine our organization in a virtual setting, we were definitely concerned about event attendance. We were concerned that we wouldn't be able to host events with the same effectiveness or are able to do the same things during our events just because of the limitations of being online. However, we found that things were actually quite the opposite. We found that being online was a safer alternative to in-person events, especially during the peak of COVID times when everyone was in quarantine. We also found that online meant that we had increased flexibility to where if a student wanted to meet one-on-one and they needed support with their academics or they needed help with taking an exam, we were able to be there right away, just create a Zoom link, and we would help them right away rather than having to either travel to reach them, in their classes or be able to schedule a time that worked for everybody. So it was definitely a lot more flexible and more accessible for the students. And just the convenience of it all. You just needed to create a Zoom link and you were able to hop online and meet with someone virtually. So we definitely found that to be a very useful resource for us. And we definitely plan to continue using Zoom as a platform in the future, even with things becoming open for in-person meetings and events. The other lesson that we learned was just the way that we needed to adapt to challenges. And so the key to our entire approach was communication and having a strong source of communication with our students, sorry?
2 minutes, okay?
Okay.
All right.
So the key way that we did this was through communication and making sure that our students knew what was going on at all times, even when things were just, when news from the university was just coming out that campus was shutting down, classes were all being moved virtual. We made sure to keep students informed and engaged throughout all of this, just to make sure that no one felt confused or lost. And even among the officer board, this was very essential in actually keeping programming consistent and smooth. The next thing we did was community engagement, and we really made sure that everyone felt that they were still involved and they were not forgotten, even in the midst of the pandemic. And the way that we did this was through our socials and our events and just creating that seamless transition. And lastly, and most importantly, through feedback, assessment, and improvement. And so through every step of our virtual transition, we really made sure that we were asking our students with intellectual disabilities, as well as our peer mentors, what we could do to really improve their experience and what they wanted to see in the programming and in the events. And with that feedback, we made sure to actually implement it and improve upon it so that students were able to see what they wanted to see and the students' needs were catered to very well. And ultimately, the last lesson that we learned was just the importance of social interaction and how much of a role it played in mental health, outlook, and productivity and just well-being. So the drastic transformation that we noticed in our students from before the implementation of our socials, when quarantine had just started and COVID was just a thing in the news, to now, after being able to attend socials frequently and feeling like they were actually involved in the community in a virtual setting, there was a drastic change in their mental health and their well-being. And so we really got to see firsthand just how some social interaction, even in a small dose in a weekly basis, could have such a large impact on students' mental and emotional health. And so ultimately, we feel that as an organization, we have done very well with transitioning to a virtual setting. And we feel that our organizational model is very well set up for other university programs and inclusive post-secondary education programs. And so we feel that our organizational model and our transition to a virtual setting can be implemented outside of our program and to different universities to support other students with intellectual disabilities in the same manner. So thank you so much for attending.
Well, let me take my hat off to you and the co-founders of an organization that is very much needed. I wish every campus could duplicate that, especially when it comes to students serving students. So I appreciate you for being here and thank you for that presentation.
Thank you so much.
Next, I want to bring on Rebecca Interest. Rebecca, you with me?
Yes, thank you. Can you see my screen?
Sure.
Okay, great. So my name is Rebecca Entris, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Central Florida. And today I'll be presenting on behalf of myself and Dr. Sungho An, who is an assistant professor at the University of Central Florida. And I'll be presenting today on public branding through social media, how American public administration schools and their leaders use Twitter. So just as a brief overview of what I'll be discussing today, first, I'll go through a brief introduction to provide a little bit of context and why this study is needed. Then I'll go through some of the literature to show a little bit of what has been done in the past and frame the study. Then I'll go through the data collection and methods that we used, followed by the results and a brief conclusion. So public administration scholars recognize the importance of social media for public and nonprofit organizations as a useful tool to develop an identity, including values, messages, and impressions, and this is broadly referred to as public branding. Through social media, including Twitter, schools can send signals about their brands when there's information asymmetry or when two parties don't have the same information on a topic. Actions of organizational leaders impact the identity and brand of an organization. For example, CEOs represent organizations as leaders where they give an identity and a human representation to companies. Similarly, deans of public administration schools represent the schools that they lead. Various disciplines in higher education use social media for academic and educational purposes, but there is currently no literature on how public administration schools and their leaders use social media. This is especially important in public administration because scholars in the field study public branding and social media use in public organizations, but have not yet studied it in their own institutions. There are a few studies on social media at the institutional level, but they are generally not discipline specific. For example, one study on how US colleges and universities use Twitter found that schools use Twitter primarily to broadcast information to enhance the school's image, suggesting that the image or the information provided could be an inaccurately positive image of the school, which would be consistent with traditional marketing efforts. Signaling theory is used in marketing to explain how information is presented from one party to another when there is information asymmetry. According to the theory, people who have knowledge not known by the general public are insiders. The insiders present positive signals about information to those who do not possess such knowledge or outsiders. Outsiders are interested in learning the insider information and they receive signals, and ultimately this impacts the product that the outsider consumes. In this study, we use signaling theory to explain how schools and leaders of public administration are using Twitter to signal that the school has a strong brand and reputation. Since leaders and schools hold information not available to potential applicants or collaborators, they are the insiders, while the potential school applicants and collaborators are the outsiders. When schools and leaders tweet, they're sending messages or signals to potential students, and those signals are interpreted by the outsiders who ultimately determine whether to attend or work with the public administration schools. This study examines the signals that public administration schools send to potential collaborators and students through social media. This is an exploratory study that will examine the following research questions. First, to what extent do public administration schools and their leaders use Twitter to engage stakeholders? And second, for what purposes do public administration schools and their leaders use Twitter? The data for this study was gathered from the top 100 public affairs schools according to the US News and World Report for 2020. We screened each school website for logos or links of social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn on the school's website, as well as the bios of the school leaders, whether that's the dean, director, or chair. This process produced 78 schools and 27 school leaders' Twitter handles. Next, we collected Twitter data from the Twitter Search Application Programming Interface, or API. To avoid any influence of seasonal factors in the patterns of Twitter utilization, we collected Twitter data for 12 months from January to December of 2019. Our final sample includes over 46,000 tweets by public administration schools and over 10,000 tweets by public administration school leaders. 92 out of 100 public administration schools use Twitter or Facebook. Twitter and Facebook are by far the most popular social media platform, which is consistent with other studies. This chart also suggests that public administration schools are keeping up with trends because Instagram is a newer platform and its use is still fairly high among public administration schools. Here you can see the extent to which schools and leaders have reach and community building capabilities through Twitter. As you can see, schools tend to have higher community building capabilities and potential reach, but the capabilities and reach for leaders is still very large for one person, meaning if school leaders are using Twitter for their schools, they can reach a larger audience than if the school alone were using Twitter. For example, schools on average had 626 retweets, and the leaders had approximately 1/3 of that, 283 tweets on average, which is a lot for one person. This slide shows that public administration leaders and schools are active on Twitter throughout the year in 2019. This shows that the pattern of tweeting is generally similar between schools and school leaders. Both tend to be more active during semesters than when on break. These charts show a bit of difference in the typical pattern of when Twitter is used by leaders in schools. Leaders tend to tweet before and after working hours, where schools typically tweet during working hours. This suggests that leaders are using Twitter by themselves, independent of their schools, even though they're still representing their schools. Here we see the most active public administration schools and leaders on Twitter. Interestingly, some of these schools and leaders do not align. For example, the LBJ school is the most active school, but not in the top 10 most active leaders, and UCF has the most active leaders, but is not in the top 10 most active schools. This suggests that there could be opportunities for schools and leaders to coordinate Twitter messaging with the goal of consistent branding if that is their goal. Here we see that public administration schools are using Twitter communication tools of retweeting and mentioning to interact with stakeholders. As seen in the network, school leaders tend to have a larger network group that they interact with on Twitter, and this implies the effective use of social media by school leaders can increase the visibility and popularity of their schools. By using hashtags, users can effectively show the main topic of each messages. Public administration schools tend to use hashtags to promote their schools. For example, hashtags on ODU, Penn State, and UNT. School leaders are more likely to use field-related hashtags, such as ASPA, Public Service, PMRC, and NASPA. Here the hashtag co-occurrences for schools are on the left and leaders are on the right. The school hashtags are school-centered. For example, some of the centers of the text analyses are ODU and UNT, and they also talked about several policy and public service issues. The leader hashtags tended to talk more about social issues, such as Hurricane Dorian, New Zealand, and Mitch McConnell. From this analysis, we know what topics were mainly discussed in the tweets, but we don't know the purpose or the context for such topics. So as a next step, we coded a sample of 1,000 tweets, 500 from schools and 500 from school leaders. This shows our initial codebook for coding and categorizing tweets and how they were developed according to the existing literature. Here we see the final codebook we developed. We refined our initial codebook after coding an initial 100 tweets and making appropriate adjustments. We developed a total of 6 message categories: faculty and student achievements, department information, field news, network building, social justice discussion, and tweets about teaching. Here we can see the results of the sample of 1,000 tweets from 2019. We can see some clear differences between the types of tweets that the public administration, schools, and leaders send. We see that schools most commonly send out tweets about department, faculty, and student achievements, while leaders most commonly tweet about field information. We also see that leaders are more likely to tweet about teaching, network building, and social justice issues. Here you can see 2 examples of faculty and student achievements, which makes up the majority of tweets from public administration schools. Here we can see 2 examples of tweets about department information, which makes up 36% of tweets by schools. And here we can see 2 examples of field information tweets, which makes up 29% of tweets from school leaders. And finally, here we can see 2 examples of faculty and student achievements, which makes up 19% of tweets from public administration schools. So in conclusion, this study provides insights into public branding by understanding how public administration schools and leaders use Twitter and social media to send signals to potential schools and collaborators. The study found that both top schools and their leaders were active on Twitter, but in different ways. These findings can be used by schools of public administration to enhance and continuously form their branding, especially with increased budgetary pressure and a reliance on tuition dollars for continued operation. There are 3 main limitations to the study. First, we only looked at Twitter, but can examine additional social media platforms in the future. Second, we also didn't look specifically at what audiences the schools were targeting. And finally, we did not relate the social media use with school outcomes, such as performance, application numbers, or rankings. But again, this is something that we can address in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. I've opened things up for questions now, and I will start. And Ms. Andrews, let me start with you. With the pandemic, with everything that's happened this year in this country, what trend do you see that going when it comes to branding and marketing? Has it changed much at all?
I think that people will be more reliant, or schools will be more reliant on social media and platforms that are low cost in order to have some type of marketing and recruit students. You know, there's so many budgetary pressures, like I was saying in the conclusion. So that schools are really going to depend on those tuition dollars, and there may also be cuts in marketing. So relying on marketing within the school and from the school leaders could be even more important.
Thank you. Any more questions? Ms. Andrews, please. Okay. Mrs. Mehta, quick question. I look at your organization, how you started up, like the founders. How about funding and community partners? Do we have community partners who are happening to fund, or is it all from the universe within partner?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first partnered with Inclusive Education Services to really provide support to our students with intellectual disabilities, they already had a lot of community partners in establishing the internships and capstone programs for our students at the end of their degree. And we helped to build these community partners. We actually expanded upon them. And we also partnered with the university specifically to allow students to get employment opportunities in the university, whether that was in the student union, in some of our libraries, in the gym, and so on. And so we did help that process significantly, but we also did have a lot of community partners just through our partnership with Inclusive Education Services.
Thank you. And Dr. Lonski and your team, you made me stop and think about a couple of things, all right? Especially when you talked about history. When people think in terms of civil rights, it's always Dr. King, which is a great person. But there was way many giants who came before Dr. King, this time. So I agree. My question was, when you look at educational policy, state and local, there seems to be a disconnect there, but disconnect based on political issue. And I'm thinking about one where I saw its local district was trying to change the books that students are reading to make America look more favorable. Mm-hmm. I worry about that.
Yes, actually, I'm a former middle school history teacher. I actually start teaching next week at Rollins a course for how to teach social science education. And I do believe that there is a disconnect between what is considered important at the state level and who creates those policies versus what is actually considered historically relevant and important to the students. Studies have shown that when students feel engaged in the curriculum, when they see themselves using Emily Stiles' theory of windows and mirrors, that not only does participation and academic growth increase, but Kane and Sport, for example, found that civic engagement increases. So students who see themselves in the curriculum, who see a more broader view of education. I love Dr. King. He's a wonderful, he wasn't part of my curriculum. I taught classic history, so Mesopotamia, etc. But when I did work with juniors in high school, they had not seen Malcolm X in the curriculum. So we explained, well, there are others. Let's talk about this. Let's see who's John Lewis. Let's talk about the women in the area. let's talk about who else there is. So I do share your concern that there is a disconnect between what is history and what is taught. I think part of it does have to go with, part of disrupting that has to go with agencies like the Peace and Justice Institute, having a voice in the creation of school policies, having a voice in the creation of state standards as well.
You know, one more quick question. I'm going back to the educational policies, and I'm going to get off in the politics, but not get off in the politics, okay? Policies of previous administration, the Obama administration, now the Biden administration. Where do you see K through 12 educational policies going in reference to what you're doing?
Well, I'm very excited to see that Dr. Jill Biden as the First Lady. As you are, most of you are probably aware that she's a teacher, and so I'm excited to see how that her influence may go into looking at education. We do see a lot of different trends looking at getting No Child Left Behind, then Race to the Top, and then the last 4 years, which I can't even wrap my head around. I believe we're looking now towards more of an idea of social justice and inclusive education. While inclusive education does, as Ms. Mehta was talking about, include students of varying disabilities, inclusive ed is also now the new term for multicultural education, recognizing ability, ethnicity, linguistic background, socioeconomic background, et cetera. I'm anticipating there to be a push towards that in schools, as well as a push towards STEAM. We have had STEM education for a while, science, technology, engineering, and math. I'm anticipating a view towards the arts as this administration is looking like it's trying to bring back ideas of culture within schools.
And I just found out that there's another presentation ready that I didn't have. Mehta, are you with me?
Yes, I am. I believe there is one more presentation from the Center for Community Schools.
Yes, and we are ready to go.
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's all right, Melvin.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
We were having problems getting on anyway initially, so it's all good.
Please, introduce yourself for a quick minute.
Yes, absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Jarrad Plante, and I proudly serve in the UCF Center for Community Schools as the Special Projects Coordinator, and my primary role is around community partnerships and community engagement. And I'm going to introduce the rest of the team here in a moment, but just wanted to kind of set the stage for our presentation, which is supporting teachers where they are, the Community Partnership Schools model. So this was an opportunity that was presented to us by UCF's Dr. Harthorne, where we were able to provide, Robert Palmer and myself were able to provide a publication in a book called Teaching, Technology, and Teacher Education During the COVID-19 Pandemic, Stories from the Field, which was part of the Association for the Advancement of Computing in Education, or AACE. And the information that you're going to hear from 3 of our community partnership school directors, that information really stemmed from the quarterly reports that they do for our grant with FDOE and the return on investment reports that they submit to us as well. So just wanted to set the stage for you all for that. So the objectives for today. One, just quick welcome introductions, a presentation giving you a kind of like a CPS 101 on community partnership schools and the impact. And then really the meat of this is around the pivoting from in-person to virtual around the community partnership schools. You'll hear from a community partnership school director from Evans, from OCPS ACE, and from Keystone Heights. So I'll let them introduce themselves now. Alex?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexandria Turnley, the Community Partnership School Director at Evans High School in Central Florida.
Shannon?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shannon Curry. I am the Community Partnership School Director at OCPS Academic Center for Excellence, known as ACE. So it's a pleasure.
And Tina?
And I'm Tina Baker. I'm the director at Keystone Heights Junior Senior High School, which is located between Gainesville and Jacksonville.
Awesome. And I'm going to pass over to Robert, who's going to take the lead on the first part of this presentation.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Palmer, and I am the University Assistance Coordinator within the UCF Center for Community Schools. So, established in 2014, the UCF Center for Community Schools' vision is to serve as a comprehensive resource for schools in Florida, across the nation, and around the world by offering technical assistance, a university-assisted partnership, training and development, as well as assessment and evaluation, all focused on the implementation of high-quality community schools. As a part of our work, we provide an evaluation of 26 community partnership school sites throughout the entire state of Florida through a strengths-based assessment process using community partnership school standards to determine their fidelity to the CPS model and efforts to meet student needs. Sites undergo a readiness assessment in year 3 where they can become certified at that time, or if they don't reach certification status within year 3, they also can undergo an additional certification process in year 5, which is normally when most of our community partnership school sites achieve a UCF certified CPS status. Just to provide some additional context for the history of the center, just at a glance, in 2009, Children's Home Society of Florida, as well as various departments within the University of Central Florida, such as the College of Education and the College of Public Health and Human Affairs, came together to discuss ways to impact the local area, specifically in the lens of education. Through these discussions, it led them to visiting Children's Aid, formerly known as Children's Aid Society, located in New York, to see the impact that community schools were having within the Harlem area. In 2012, with this knowledge, Children's Home Society of Florida, as well as UCF, partnered with Orange County Public Schools and an additional local healthcare provider to implement a model that leverages resources to meet the needs of students and families, which led to the very first community partnership school site being at Evans High School, which is our flagship community partnership school. From that time in 2015, due to the impact that was shown and taking place within Evans High School, as well as the surrounding Pine Hills community, this allowed for FDOE to provide us additional funding at the approval of our state's legislature to lead the expansion of community partnership schools to additional school districts within the state of Florida, as well as allow for us to focus on the creation of our UCF Certified Community Partnership School process to ensure fidelity to the model based on our 12 standards. So as you can see, in a short span of time since the very first community partnership school was implemented, there's been tremendous growth to get to where we are today with 26 sites throughout the entire state. The work of the center, as well as community partnership schools broadly, are a part of a larger national effort that utilizes community schools as an equity-based strategy that improves schools as well as communities. Successful community schools are all grounded in collaborative leadership, expanded learning, wellness supports, as well as family and community engagement that create synergy to improve outcomes for students and families. And these are known as the 4 pillars for community school success. And they are grounded in research as well as practice-based data that has been found within the field. So within the community partnership school model, there are 4 key components. And these components focus on leveraging multiple resources from each of the core partners to help support staff as they work towards meeting the need of students in their communities. And that's where the aspect of partnership by having 4 core partners at the table really supports in that process. To also align with the 4 pillars for community school success, there are always at least 4 dedicated staff positions at each site. And in addition to that, there's a distributive organizational structure that includes the Student Leadership Council, Community Leadership Council, and parent involvement at all decision-making levels to ensure that all stakeholders have a say and things are being done with the community as opposed to the community. As I mentioned in the previous slide, each of our community partnership school sites have at least 4 core partners. Some have the blessing of having more than 4 core partners, such as OCPS ACE, which Shannon will definitely share some information about that later in our presentation. While all staff positions are typically funded by the nonprofit operator of the community partnership school, all partners leverage their available resources both individually and collectively to support efforts that can meet the needs of students as well as their families. And what makes the community partnership school model so unique in the landscape of community schools is that all of the partners, all of the core partners enter into a formal agreement known as a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, that focuses on a 25+ year commitment. That way generational change can take place within the communities that we serve. So as I mentioned before, there are the 4 core positions that are affiliated with the community partnership school model. These positions reflect the pillars for community school success, where collaborative leadership, which is led by the director, focuses on improving the capacity of staff in the school, such as the teachers, and providing professional development where appropriate, and ensuring that the community partnership school director is integrated with the school district administration at the school as well, to ensure that the academic needs of students are being met. There's also expanded learning, which is led by the expanded learning coordinator, which seeks to supplement classroom academics through enrichment activities that take place before, during, and after school, also on the weekends or during summer, which can include tutoring, mentorship programs that are supported by internal or external volunteers. There's also wellness supports, which focuses on ensuring access to a range of health and social services that are provided on the school's campus. For example, physical, behavioral, or mental health, as well as the pillar for family and community engagement that's also led by a coordinator, which really focuses on bringing families into the school building and have them at the table as a part of the effort towards meeting the needs for students, and also identifying any needs that the families have as well, as we understand that stronger families also lead to stronger students and stronger communities. So again, we have 26 sites throughout the entire state of Florida, and our legend on the left-hand side of the screen will have our sites that are UCF certified community partnership schools identified in yellow. We also have our sites that are in the implementation phase of the community partnership school program or grant funding that are implementing the different programs and services and have their staff, as far as their CPS core staff, all hired on, working to not only identify needs for students and families, but also implement those programs and services. And then last but not least, we have our sites in green, and those are sites that were recently awarded the funding to implement the community partnership school model. And they're working on improving the capacity that they have at their site to meet the needs of their students and families. Jarrad, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you to share more about the impacts that we've been able to see so far.
Great, thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. We'll go through the impact rather quickly, but this some key preliminary findings that we have at several of our community partnership schools that we wanted to highlight for you. So first with CA Weiss, which is up in Panhandle, K through 8 school. It was established in 2017, certified in 2019. And as you can tell from the implementation of the community partnership school model, they've had a decrease in the out-of-school suspensions, while at the same time also seeing an increase in teacher retention, which is really, really important. And Endeavor Elementary School out in Cocoa, it's a K through 6. Their teacher retention, same thing, is steadily showing an increase over time from this past year. And then the FSA, or Florida State Standard Assessments, have increased as well. We're going to see, of course, there might be a caveat for this year given COVID, but for everything that's happened pre-COVID, the trends are heading in the right direction. And it's also a great opportunity to kind of showcase the fact that this also is an intervention to help prevent some of those things from happening. At OCPS ACE, Academic Center for Excellence in downtown at Paramore, it's a pre-K through 8th grade. They have their Lion's Share food pantry, which was established right before COVID hit. Right as things were hitting. And it was a perfect time because there was a lot of food that was distributed to a lot of different families. Most of those families have at least one student, many of them having multiple students throughout the pre-K through 8th grade school. And then, of course, they go up to Jones High School. And then their discipline-based referrals, dropped considerably, if you notice, from 1,079 to only 316 from the 17-18 school year to the 18-19 school year. And then finally, Evans High School, and I know Alex is very proud of this, the graduation rate, as you can see, really has grown quite a bit. It had a big jump from its inception. Again, our flagship from 2010 to 2011 had a big spike initially and then grew over time. And this past winter edition of our newsletter showed that it's now at 98% when it comes to graduation rates. And so we have a quick video to show you, and then you're going to hear from our community partnership school directors.
Just to make sure, can everyone see the video that's loaded up here?
Yes.
Thank you.
I was going through a lot due to my brother being murdered and also my other brother being in prison. Only thing was our mama didn't support us. So that's what really made us turn to the streets.
This is the reality of forgotten communities in Florida, the hopelessness of children bleeding into our cities and draining potential. But imagine having the power to improve a neighborhood and create real economic impact by simply transforming a Title I battleground school into an academic center of excellence with an 88% graduation rate. It's not magic. It's a cost-effective investment called a community partnership school. At Children's Home Society of Florida, we've created a unique model that offers kids and families a helping hand with a proven path to success.
We have children that go home on the weekends that don't have food. And so we have a food pantry. We have clothing facility where we're really making sure that we are trying to help meet the needs to lift up our families, to give them that hope for the future that they can make a difference.
These kids are dealing with complex adult problems, but community partnership schools are eliminating these barriers to education. Through long-term community partnerships, students have year-round and after-hour access to services like counseling, healthcare, tutoring, as well as mentorship programs that not only keep children off the streets, but transform the entire community.
Oh, the difference at Evans High School as community partnership school is night and day. We've seen disciplinary referrals drop as far as 50% when they became a community partnership school, which is a huge, huge, huge feat for them to conquer.
The safety results are real, and it's happening at every community partnership school. At Weiss Elementary in Pensacola, the number of disciplinary referrals dropped by 43% and suspensions were cut in half in the first year. Focused on lifelong success, our community partnership schools are also engineering a career pipeline in the most distressed neighborhoods, creating real economic results. At Evans High School in Orlando, there's been a 4-to-1 return on investment, and the rising graduation rates have resulted in $1.6 million of increased income for the region.
Working closely with the Community Partnership School has allowed me and my business to get involved at the community level in ways that I never would have thought possible. And there is a direct impact in terms of improving the community, which turns around, makes my business more marketable, and makes business much better.
It gave me hope because around in this area, we don't have hope like that. Some kids give up on themselves and they give up on their dreams. With me and having this internship, I can, it's like I'm able to keep pushing because I'm actually around people that actually been places that I want to go. So that just gives you the extra push and the extra motivation that you need to succeed in life.
Help us remind kids and communities that we haven't given up on them, and together we're investing in their future. At CHS, we're proving community partnership schools deliver solutions that change lives.
So hopefully that kind of highlights all that information for you. The next slide, just to kind of, as we go into hearing from our community partnership school directors as they've gone from in-person to virtual, some of these questions to kind of consider. How do we continue meeting the needs of the students and families? Is there a way we can support teachers as they provide virtual instruction? What potential needs may arise, and what can we continue to engage our families? So first up, we'll pass it over to Alex to talk about Evans High School.
Hello, everyone. So around last year, this time, we went on spring break and we did not come back. So everything was transferred onto virtual learning. And during that time, we met with our team and we were like, how can we still provide students and families with the resources that they need while being virtual, because we know that there was still a need for our services. So because we utilize Google programming through the Google Suite, we decided to put together a virtual hub, which is a virtual version of the community partnership school that is usually on campus, so that students and families were able to go on this website and find resources, whether it's utility resources during this time, places who are giving out food, or just access medical services, a place to make appointments, access their virtual enrichment programs and virtual enrichment. So we created a Google site for these different services. We also, during this time, started to do calls to non-working students to help with the teachers for any students who weren't engaging. So our admin team did that, and they were able to direct families over to this website if they were experiencing any trouble in any areas, refer them for different resources. Our team put together Google numbers so that they were still accessible while at home, not only via email, but also through those Google numbers. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see an example of a flyer, again, making sure that we were able to have everything digital for our students and their families to post on social media and via this site, so that they could still access these services. And we were able to pivot a lot of our services to whether it was like telehealth through counseling and things of that nature. We just wanted to make sure that our students were still able to access all of our wonderful services. So I'll pass it over to Shannon next.
Thank you. Very similar to what Alex mentioned about trying to do our very best to continue providing support, resources, and services to our children, our students, and our families. We created a Homework Cafe. So Homework Cafe is an activity that we created a couple years ago as a creative way to allow students access to their normal curriculum, but in a fun way. So it was something fun for our students and for our teachers, because they can kind of, be as creative as they want to be to share some of the core curriculum with our students. So in order to keep this activity going, we created the virtual edition. And we stayed on the same routine of our Homework Cafe, which typically was like the third or fourth Wednesday of every month. And we have realized that, now we're in a situation where we have to make a decision. Do we stay virtual or do we go face to face? Because our virtual interaction, our participation numbers, we're averaging about 700 students. So it's ridiculous, where typically in a face-to-face activity, we may have, between 30 to 50 people, month to month. And we were always collecting information of unique visits. So we're always looking at improvement. And through this virtual edition, we are averaging an increase and I should have written the numbers down, I didn't, but an increase of participation. So when in 1 month we did like 769, and then the next month we were already in the 800. So I believe we landed on something very unique and something that really supporting, students as we are dealing with the outcomes of the pandemic. So we have our Homework Cafe, again, which is something that our students and our teachers look forward to, and it provides a component in there for families. Now, what was unique about this is that we started this on Facebook. So let me kind of go back a little bit. We started it on Facebook, and the numbers that I told you about earlier were what we found on Canvas. So our Facebook numbers were not as high as our Canvas numbers. So we understand that using Canvas is the right avenue to continue to host our Homework Cafe virtual edition. You switch the slide. And then, like Alex mentioned, we have our virtual resource guide, again, keeping families connected. We wanted to make sure that we did not miss a beat in providing support services to our families and to our students. So they have access to us virtually through questionnaires that we can easily and quickly respond to their needs, just as it would be so if they, Evans has the hub, we have the den because we're the Lions. So just as they could walk to the Lions Den, they're able to access us even now virtually to receive any of the support services that they need. Okay. And this is just our questionnaire.
Awesome. We'll pass it over to Tina.
Hi, again, I'm Tina Baker from Keystone, and one of the other pieces of the community partnership school is the collaboration with our community. So in Keystone Heights, we're kind of an isolated rural community with a lot of sketchy or not really good internet and communication. So one of the things that we, as a community, the partnership reached out to the community, and we worked with the local food bank and some faith-based organizations and a family crisis center that we were kind of preparing ourselves for the hurricanes that we're going to expect in late summer and early fall. So we put together a process to where if that was to hit, how can we find out the needs of our family? What is going on? What is it that they need? And so we developed 2 forms. And what you see here is the self-identification form. And then the next one, and in just a short minute, we'll show you is the volunteer form. So we had just put this process together when the next week, we were on spring break, the next week COVID hit. And so we tweaked our forms to really be COVID related. And then we pulled together our community members that was already working with us. There were about 6 of us. And then we first went out with the volunteer form that you see here. And we sent it out to our faith-based organization. All of our teachers, even teachers outside of Keystone, responded to this form. So we have a large base. I would say we had almost between 35 to 40, and that may not seem big to you, but that for Keystone, that was a large base. And then we assigned each volunteer, any community member or family or whoever filled out the previous form, we assigned them up to 5, and they were responsible to contacting our families once a week to do a check-in. How are you doing? What are your immediate needs? Are you having some issues that we can help get resources or medical or dental issues resolved for you? And it really was a consolidated community effort. And from this, we were able to work with the food bank to do food grab and goes, where we were processing upwards to 300 families a month for about 3 months in a row. In fact, this model worked so well that the Clay County Emergency Center took this model and implemented it countywide to help the community, other communities within Clay County. So this was a community response based on what we learned in the community partnership school of reaching out and connecting and partnering with everyone in a moment of crisis.
Thank you. Dr. Plante. I'm going by reminiscing now. Being from the old COPA.
Yes, that's right.
This is one of the
Center for Community Partnerships.
I'm telling you, is Dr. Ellis still there?
No, she's retired. She moved out west.
Oh, my goodness. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that I'm proud of you, your team, but also you added so much to the state when it comes to welfare of children, schools. One question would be, how do you select your schools to be part of this program?
Yeah, thank you, Mel. But I'll pass it to Robert to answer that question. But I did want to just point out that I was able to put something in the chat for everybody so that they could take a look at this more in depth, because there are a lot of really great free resources from that book that Robert and I had the the honor of being able to contribute to, that I think could be really helpful for everybody. But Robert, I'll pass it to you to answer that question.
Appreciate it. Every fiscal year, with the exception of this past fiscal year, we open up a grant application cycle for prospective school districts, as well as schools that are interested in becoming a community partnership school, where they actually have to request funding through the center after we have already been allocated funds from FDOE as agreed upon by state legislature. And through that grant application process, we're able to determine what partnerships already exist within that locale area and determine the needs of that particular school site, and seeing how this model and its implementation can help elevate the outcomes for students and their families.
And I don't know if you realize or not, we started with one school, right, Jarrad? At this point, how many schools have we, from the time we started, have we gained through the state and have financed through the legislators?
Yeah, if we went from the one at Evans, right, and now we're at 26 across the state, which is pretty incredible.
Again, thank you to you and your team. Keep doing the good. We'll get together for a cup of coffee and catch up on life, okay?
Definitely. We definitely appreciate that. And you know, because it is the power of partnership, everybody on this call could really get involved in one way or another when it comes to this in any of our community partnership schools and or the Center for Community Schools. So, you know, please let us know if and how you want to get involved. And we'd love to be able to do that. And we definitely appreciate you all having us here this afternoon.
Well, Jarrad, PJI has been working with Jones and ACE, so it's interesting that we got on the same panel. So yes, we are a part of, I hope we're a part of that community.
Yeah, that's right. So Lori and her team with PJI, they've already worked with OCPS, ACE, and Jones around DEI, and it's been great because some of our staff have been able to be a part of that as well. And it's just so important. All of those components are just so important for the welfare of the children and for the growth and development of families in the community. So we definitely appreciate that, Lori. Thank you.
To the panel, any questions or of each other with such a bright group? If not, I know my time is up. I appreciate everyone and have a safe and a good weekend. And thanks so much to everyone participating. Goodbye.